For over a decade, Karen Birchwood had ruled the Oakwood Estates HOA with an iron grip. What had once been a peaceful, suburban neighborhood had slowly transformed under her leadership into a place where rules were more important than people. Every flower bed, every trash can placement, every minor aesthetic choice was under her scrutiny. But those who knew Karen well understood that her obsession with order was just a mask for something much uglier. Karen had a history of making life unbearable for black residents in the neighborhood. While she claimed to enforce rules fairly, it was obvious who her real targets were. White homeowners who violated regulations would get gentle reminders or friendly warnings. But black families? They received immediate fines, threats of legal action, and passive-aggressive notes stuffed into their mailboxes. Joshua Carter was her biggest headache. He had moved into the neighborhood 2 years ago, purchasing a beautiful corner lot home with a spacious yard. A successful entrepreneur, he was well-spoken, well-dressed, and well-off, 3 things Karen hated seeing in a black man living next door. She had tried everything to make his life difficult. First, she cited him for having a non-regulation fence, even though it was the same style as 10 others in the neighborhood. Then, she reported him for excessive noise when he had friends over for a barbecue, an event that ended at 9 p.m. When that didn't work, she complained that his grass was too green and accused him of using unauthorized fertilizer. But no matter what she threw at him, Joshua refused to be bullied. He knew the rules, followed them to the letter, and never gave her a reason to fine him. He was polite but firm, never losing his temper, which only infuriated Karen more. And on this particular day, after an especially terrible shift at work, she was already looking for a fight. That's when she saw it. Across the street, Joshua was proudly rolling out a brand new lawnmower, its sleek black and chrome design gleaming in the sunlight. He pulled the cord, and the powerful engine roared to life. Humming to himself, he pushed it forward, neatly trimming the grass as he went. Karen's blood boiled. How dare he enjoy himself in her neighborhood? Her hands clenched into fists. She slammed her car door shut and stormed across the street, fury radiating from her like heat off asphalt. The second Karen stepped onto Joshua's property, she started screaming. "That machine is illegal," she shrieked, pointing at the lawnmower like it was a weapon of mass destruction. "I will have it removed, and I will have you removed." Joshua, startled, turned off the mower. He wiped the sweat from his brow and looked at her with pure disbelief. "Excuse me." Karen jabbed a finger toward his face. "That model is too loud. It violates HOA noise regulations. And I don't recall approving it." Joshua sighed, already regretting engaging with her. "Karen, the HOA rules don't say anything about lawnmower noise limits. And I did check the guidelines. This model is well within the acceptable decibel range." But Karen wasn't interested in facts. She wanted control. "I don't care what the guidelines say," she snapped. "I am the HOA president. I decide what is and isn't acceptable." Joshua shook his head. "That's not how it works. If you have a problem, bring it up at the next meeting." That was the last thing Karen wanted to hear. Her face twisted with rage. "You shouldn't even be here," she spat. And then, before Joshua could even react, she reached down, grabbed a rock from her carefully manicured flower bed, and threw it at him. The first rock missed, landing in the grass. The second struck the metal frame of the lawnmower with a loud clang. Joshua took a step back, his shock turning into something colder. "Are you serious right now?" Karen wasn't finished. "You don't belong here," she shrieked, grabbing another rock. "I'll have you thrown out of this neighborhood one way or another." Across the street, neighbors peeked through curtains, some too afraid to intervene, others already holding up their phones to record. They had seen Karen's meltdowns before, but this was different. This was dangerous. Joshua took a deep breath. He wasn't going to retaliate, he knew how that story ended. Instead, he held up his hands, his voice calm but firm. "Karen, you need to walk away. Right now." But Karen did the opposite. She lunged at him, shoving him in the chest with both hands. Joshua barely moved, but the act itself sent shockwaves through the onlookers. She shoved him again, harder this time. "You think you can just do whatever you want? You think this is your neighborhood? It's mine." Joshua clenched his jaw. "Karen, you're assaulting me. You need to stop." But she didn't stop. Her words turned to slurs, ugly, vile things that made even the most indifferent neighbors flinch. Her voice grew hoarse, her face twisted with a hatred that had been simmering for years. And then, as if fate itself had been waiting for the perfect moment, the sound of sirens shattered the tension. Red and blue lights flashed across the perfectly manicured lawns. The police had arrived. The wail of sirens sliced through the thick tension in the air. A police SUV came to a screeching halt in front of Joshua's house, its red and blue lights flashing against the pristine white fences of Oakwood Estates. 2 officers stepped out, one older, with salt and pepper hair and a stiff stance, the other younger, barely past his academy training. Their hands hovered near their belts as they quickly scanned the scene. Karen, her face twisted in fake distress, immediately switched gears. She ran toward the officers, waving her arms like a woman in desperate need of help. "Thank God you're here," she wailed, pointing at Joshua. "This man attacked me. He's trespassing, he threatened me, I barely got away." The younger cop narrowed his eyes. "You said he attacked you?" "Yes. He tried to steal my property, and when I confronted him, he lunged at me. I had to defend myself." Joshua scoffed. "Are you serious?" "Shut up." Karen snapped at him, her voice full of venom. Then she turned back to the cops, her expression shifting into fake vulnerability. "Please, officers, I just want to feel safe in my own neighborhood." The older cop frowned. "Ma'am, take a step back." Karen did as she was told, folding her arms with a smug smirk, fully expecting the officers to cuff Joshua right then and there. After all, it had always worked before. But this time, things didn't go the way she planned. One of the neighbors, a middle-aged woman named Linda, stepped onto her porch, phone in hand. "That's a damn lie," she said, loud and clear. "I got the whole thing on video." Karen's face drained of color. The older cop glanced at Linda, then at the small crowd of neighbors gathering on the sidewalks. Several of them had their phones out, all recording. The truth was already out there, spreading like wildfire. The younger officer turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, did you throw something at Mr. Carter?" Karen's lips trembled. He provoked me. He was being aggressive." "You don't understand." "We do understand," the older cop cut in. He turned to Joshua. "Sir, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Joshua said. "But she shoved me. Twice." The officer sighed, rubbing his temple. "All right, here's what's happening. Ma'am, turn around and place your hands behind your back." Karen's eyes widened in pure disbelief. "What? You're under arrest for assault and filing a false police report." No, this isn't how this is supposed to go," she shrieked, stumbling backward. "You're supposed to be arresting him." The younger cop stepped forward, his patience gone. "Turn around." Karen's breath hitched. She whipped her head toward the neighbors, searching for support, but all she found were cold, knowing stares. No one was coming to help her. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she screamed, kicking at the air like a child throwing a tantrum. Joshua crossed his arms, exhaling deeply. It was over. Or so he thought. Because within hours, Karen Birchwood's real past would come to light. And it would be uglier than anyone had imagined. News of Karen's arrest spread like wildfire through Oakwood Estates. Within hours, video footage of her meltdown went viral, drawing the attention of local reporters and activists. People demanded answers. Who was this woman? And had she done this before? The truth came out faster than anyone expected. A journalist named Derek Lowe, known for exposing corrupt HOA leaders, dug into Karen's past. What he uncovered was worse than anyone could have imagined. Karen Birchwood wasn't just a racist neighbor. She had ties to a white supremacist group. An old photo surfaced, Karen, much younger, standing in a dimly lit backyard, wearing a white hood. The image was grainy, but the smirk on her face was unmistakable. She wasn't just affiliated with hate groups. She had been a part of one. And it didn't stop there. More residents started coming forward, revealing that Karen had been quietly discriminating against Black and Hispanic homeowners for years. She had blocked Black families from moving in by flagging their mortgage applications for review. She had issued bogus citations to Latino homeowners, forcing them to pay thousands in unnecessary HOA fees. Even worse, former HOA board members admitted that Karen had personally rejected plans for a neighborhood diversity initiative, claiming it would lower the value of Oakwood Estates. The evidence was overwhelming. Karen had spent years pretending to be a respectable HOA president. But underneath it all, she was nothing more than a glorified bigot with a clipboard. Her employer, a high-end real estate agency, released a statement within hours of the news breaking. "We are horrified and disgusted by the actions of Karen Birchwood. Effective immediately, she has been terminated from her position." By the next morning, Karen's house was vandalized, eggs splattered across her windows, crude messages spray-painted on her garage. The same neighbors who had once feared her were now openly celebrating her downfall. But the worst blow came from the Oakwood Estates HOA itself. An emergency meeting was held, and for the first time in years, the board voted unanimously. Karen Birchwood was permanently stripped of her title. And just like that, the woman who had spent over a decade controlling the neighborhood had lost everything. Her power. Her job. Her reputation. And soon, she would lose her freedom too. Because the police had just added a new charge to her case, a hate crime. The day after Karen Birchwood's arrest, Oakwood Estates was buzzing with energy. It was as if the entire neighborhood had woken up from a long nightmare. People who had spent years living under Karen's rule finally felt free to speak out, and they weren't holding back. "I always knew she was racist," muttered Mr. Thompson, a retired veteran who had lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. "She fined my grandson for playing basketball in the driveway, but when the Johnson kids did it? Nothing. She told my husband our house ruined the aesthetic when we moved in," added Mrs. Ramirez. "Like we were the problem. She just didn't want us here." More and more stories poured in. Black families spoke about how Karen had tried to push them out with endless citations. Latino homeowners recalled how she targeted them with absurd rules about lawn decorations. Even white neighbors admitted that Karen had pressured them into filing complaints against their Black and brown neighbors, making them feel guilty if they didn't comply. For years, Karen had hidden her racism behind HOA regulations. But now, the mask was gone, and the entire community had turned against her. Meanwhile, Karen sat in a jail cell, fuming. "How dare they," she muttered under her breath. "After everything I've done for that neighborhood, for those people, this is how they repay me." She was still convinced she had done nothing wrong. Still convinced she was the victim. But the police didn't see it that way. After reviewing the video evidence, they officially charged Karen with assault, filing a false police report, and committing a hate crime. If convicted, she could face years in prison. Karen's lawyer, a jittery man who clearly knew he was representing a lost cause, tried to argue that she had been under extreme stress and didn't mean any harm. But the prosecution wasn't having it. She threw rocks at a man for mowing his lawn. She shoved him. She screamed racial slurs at him, the prosecutor said in court. "That's not stress. That's hatred. The judge agreed. Karen Birchwood was officially denied bail. The woman who had once controlled the entire neighborhood was now locked up, waiting for trial. And outside, Oakwood Estates was moving on without her. With Karen out of the picture, Oakwood Estates underwent a transformation. The HOA, no longer under her rule, held an emergency election. For the first time in years, people actually wanted to be involved. Homeowners who had once avoided HOA meetings flooded the community center, eager to make sure no one like Karen ever held power again. And when it came time to vote for a new HOA president, Joshua Carter won by a landslide. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same woman who had tried everything to get him out of the neighborhood had accidentally set him up as its new leader. But Joshua didn't let the position go to his head. Instead of using it for personal revenge, he made it his mission to undo every bit of damage Karen had caused. The first thing he did: revoked every unfair fine she had issued. Families who had been burdened with bogus fees found relief. People who had lived in fear of HOA retaliation finally felt at peace. The second thing he did: changed the HOA's rules. Gone were Karen's ridiculous regulations about mailbox colors and lawn decorations. Instead, the new guidelines focused on actual community improvement, safety, property maintenance, and inclusion. For the first time in years, Oakwood Estates felt like a neighborhood again, not just Karen's personal kingdom. Meanwhile, Karen's downfall didn't stop at the courtroom. Her house, once the most pristine in the neighborhood, sat abandoned and vandalized. Someone spray-painted "racist" across her garage. Her car tires were slashed. Eggs splattered her windows every morning. And when her trial finally came, she lost. Big time. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict her of assault and a hate crime. The judge, clearly fed up with her lack of remorse, sentenced her to 5 years in prison. When the verdict was announced, the courtroom erupted in cheers. Joshua, watching from the back, simply nodded. Justice had been served. Months passed. The neighborhood continued to thrive without Karen. Barbecues became common again. Families walked their dogs without worrying about surprise HOA violations. Kids played in their driveways without fear of complaints. One evening, as Joshua relaxed on his porch, sipping a cold drink, he watched his neighbors chat and laugh under the setting sun. A few houses down, Mrs. Ramirez waved at him. "You did a good thing, Mr. President," she called out with a smile. Joshua chuckled. "Just doing my part." And as he leaned back in his chair, taking in the peaceful view, he realized something. For the first time in a long time, Oakwood Estates was finally a place where everyone belonged.